A 6-year-old girl, shoes barely tied, stepped into the glass office of Chicago's most powerful CEO. In her tiny hands, an old, wrinkled resume. Executives watched, stunned, as she stood on tiptoe and placed it on the CEO's desk, her voice trembling but clear. "I need to work for my mom." No one moved. In that silence, something about this picture felt deeply wrong. What pushes a child to beg for a job among millionaires? If you've ever felt there's more beneath the surface than what people show, or if this moment tugs at something inside you, stay with us. And if you wish, like, subscribe, or leave a thought below. It matters in ways you might not expect. The first light crept into downtown Chicago as Lakeview Tower shimmered with the low hum of anticipation. Even before most of the city's office lights blinked to life, the marble lobby was already echoing with the cadence of polished shoes and clipped greetings. On the 34th floor, glass walls framed a sky bruised blue and gold. In the main boardroom, Michael Thornton, CEO of Thornton Enterprises, stood in front of a long table, flanked by the city's most influential shareholders. Their voices measured, decisive, filled the air with discussions of quarterly projections, future acquisitions, and the weight of responsibility that came with running a corporate empire. Michael listened, his gaze unwavering, giving nothing away. For him, these meetings were routine, a measured dance of authority and expectation, the same ritual every week since he took the helm. There was safety in repetition, in knowing the rules and playing them well. But that morning, as the final point was raised and the conversation started to dwindle, the room's rhythm was abruptly broken. The heavy doors swung open. In the threshold stood a small girl, barely more than a child, dressed in a red sweater too large for her slender frame. She held a single sheet of paper, its edges bent, covered in blocky, determined handwriting. The silence grew thick. For a second, nobody moved. She took a breath, then walked straight toward Michael. Her steps were steady, even as her fingers trembled slightly. The security guard at the end of the corridor began to step forward, but she looked at him, chin high, and he stopped in his tracks. She stopped in front of Michael, her head barely level with the edge of the glossy table. She pushed the paper toward him. "I need a job," she said, her voice carrying farther than it should have, echoing off the glass and steel. No one laughed, though some exchanged glances. A CEO's office was not the place for a child, much less one with demands. Michael didn't move right away. He studied her, the way a man who spent a lifetime reading contracts tries to read people, but sometimes finds himself at a loss. Her face was pale, cheeks blotched red with cold, hair tucked behind her ears. She looked him straight in the eye. It unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He looked down at the paper. It was a resume, handwritten in blue ink. At the top, Lily Evans, age 6. Below, her skills. Drawing, reading to my mom, counting change at the store. Her interests, fixing things, helping people, being brave. Under the line for references, she'd simply written, "My mom, Olivia Evans." There was one more line, larger than the rest, circled twice. "I want to help my mom live." A heaviness settled in the room. The board members watched, their skepticism shifting to curiosity, to discomfort. Michael cleared his throat, but his words wouldn't come. He realized he'd seen determination before negotiating deals, winning court battles, but never in a child this small. He folded his hands in front of him. "Where's your mother?" "Lily," he managed. "She didn't blink. She's at home. She's sick. I came here because you help people. I read about you in the Tribune." One of the directors leaned forward. "Is this some kind of joke?" But Lily didn't flinch. Her eyes shone with a quiet stubbornness that made the room feel smaller, more intimate. Michael saw something there he hadn't seen in a long time, a look that refused to be turned away. He glanced at the security guard, who shifted uncomfortably, unsure of the protocol. "Should I call someone?" he asked in a low voice. "No," Michael said, more forcefully than he meant to. He turned back to Lily, feeling the boardroom's attention, the weight of expectation bearing down on him from all sides. He knelt down so that his eyes were level with hers. He could see the faint bruise of exhaustion under her eyes, the rawness of a child who hadn't slept well in days. "Why do you think I can help?" he asked. Lily gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. "Because you helped the Sanchez family when their boy was sick. You gave them a house. I saw it in the paper. My mom needs help, too. I can work for you. I can be brave, just like you." Michael felt something shift in his chest. For a moment, he was no longer the CEO, no longer the man with all the answers. He was just another person in the presence of need. The board members looked at each other, the air prickling with confusion, annoyance, curiosity. One of them murmured, "This is highly irregular. Michael." He nodded, never taking his eyes off Lily. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "irregular is exactly what's needed." But before he could say more, Lily leaned forward, eyes bright with a desperation too old for her age. "My mom's dying. I have to help her." The words were simple, but the honesty in them cut through every layer of professionalism Michael had ever worn. He had no script for this, no policy, no standard operating procedure. The silence stretched, heavy and expectant, the city outside just beginning to stir. He watched Lily's small hands, the way she pressed her lips together, refusing to cry. He remembered, suddenly, being a child in a room full of adults, hoping someone would see him. The memory was sharp, unexpected. He didn't know what to say, only that this moment mattered in a way he hadn't felt in years. She held his gaze, unflinching. In that pause, something fragile and real hung between them, something that didn't need words at all. The weight of silence pressed down on the 34th floor after Lily's words faded, echoing longer than anyone would have liked. For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to pause in the boardroom. The little girl's resume still lay between Michael and the polished glass table, an island of vulnerability in a sea of authority. Then, like a dam bursting, movement erupted from the edges of the room. The head of security, Tom Jennings, a former Marine with a trimmed gray beard and practiced caution, strode in, followed closely by Heather, Michael's senior executive assistant, clipboard clutched tightly to her chest. Michael's signal was quiet but sharp, a raised palm, a look that brokered no argument. "Please, everyone, give us the room," he said. His voice, usually measured, carried a new gravity. There was a shuffle as board members and assistants collected their belongings, casting sideways glances at Lily as if she might shatter at the slightest provocation. Tom hesitated, eyeing Michael for assurance, then nodded and stepped out, leaving the door clicking softly behind him. The hum of the city filtered in through the window panes, faint but persistent. A distant reminder that life outside this tower would go on no matter what happened here. Only Michael, Lily, and Madison remained. Madison Carter, 32, thoughtful, with the kind of steady gaze that could unnerve even the most seasoned executives, leaned against the far wall, arms folded. She had watched the entire exchange with growing interest, the practical side of her mind at war with the empathy rising in her chest. Michael took a seat opposite Lily, folding his hands, not as a CEO, but as a man trying to understand the unfathomable. "How did you get in, Lily?" His tone was gentle, but there was a thread of incredulity he couldn't mask. "Where's your mother?" Lily sat on the edge of the big leather chair, feet swinging above the carpet, face composed, but her hands worrying the hem of her sweater. She lifted her chin. "I waited outside until someone held the door. I told the guard I was here to see you. My mom, she doesn't know I'm here. She's sick at home. She wouldn't let me come if she knew." Madison stepped forward, her skepticism softening. "What's wrong with your mom?" Her voice was low, coaxing, as if talking to her own younger self. "She used to be a nurse at Mercy Hospital," Lily said. "She got sick last year, couldn't keep her job. We moved to South Side, to a small place. She tries not to let me see her cry, but I know." There was a pause, the kind that stretches and threatens to break. Michael tapped his fingers on the table, each movement betraying the turmoil in his mind. He thought of the building's endless security protocols, the walls that kept the outside world at bay, and realized how meaningless those walls felt with a child like Lily inside. Madison's eyes lingered on Lily. She saw the resolve beneath the smallness, the kind of strength that grows out of necessity, not choice. She found herself remembering days from her own past nights in a cramped apartment, watching her mother work 2 jobs and pretend everything was fine. Michael cleared his throat, trying to reclaim some sense of order. Why me? Lily. There are people whose job it is to help in these situations. Lily stared at her hands. You help the Sanchez family. The Tribune said you have a fund for kids who are sick. I thought, maybe you could help my mom too. Her words were quiet, but they carried a conviction that filled the room. Madison knelt down so she was eye level with Lily. What would you do if you could work here? She asked, trying to balance the line between reality and kindness. Lily looked up, hope flickering behind her eyes. Anything. Clean the kitchen. Answer the phone. I just want to help pay for my mom's medicine. Michael felt the familiar shell of professionalism slip away, replaced by something more fragile. In Lily's small, steady voice, he heard echoes of sacrifice and love that cut deeper than any business loss he'd ever suffered. Outside, a faint knock came from the door. Tom's voice filtered through, cautious but firm. Michael, I need a word when you're free. Security needs to file a report. Michael looked at Madison. She caught his gaze, then shifted back to Lily. You really want to work for your mother? She asked, searching the girl's face for any sign of pretense. Lily nodded, her jaw set. She'd do it for me. A silent understanding passed between Madison and Michael. Madison placed her hand gently over Lily's, not as an executive, but as someone who knew what it meant to be small in a world built for giants. Let's see what we can do, she said softly. But even as comfort seeped into the room, a ripple of unease threaded through them. The hallway outside buzzed again with activity, and Michael knew that soon. This private moment would be subject to the scrutiny of rules, policies, and the eyes of people who wouldn't understand. He looked out the window, catching his own reflection, older, more uncertain than he remembered. The city waited, indifferent and unyielding, just beyond the glass. And in that stillness, with one hand resting over Lily's, Madison realized she was no longer just an observer. She'd crossed a line she could not step back from, and the next move might change more than any of them could see. Inside the boardroom, the city's distant hum faded, replaced by the soft tapping of Lily's shoes on the chair leg. Michael glanced at the child and then at Madison, who had settled beside Lily, her expression caught somewhere between wariness and compassion. Michael's voice broke the hush. Tell me about your mother, Lily. I want to understand. Lily drew a small breath. She fidgeted with the sleeve of her sweater, eyes focused on the table. My mom, Olivia Evans, used to work at Mercy Hospital. She helped people, even when she was tired or sad. She always said nurses don't get to pick who needs them. Lily paused, her voice fragile but sure. Now she's sick, and nobody's there for her. Not the hospital, not the people she helped. She tried to be brave, but we're alone. The words hovered, stark and unvarnished, piercing through Michael's armor. He watched Lily's eyes, how they flickered with something both young and terribly old. Michael looked at Madison, who nodded, silent permission to dig deeper. Madison reached for her tablet, searching the city's medical records. Her fingers danced quickly over the keys, eyes narrowing with each line she scanned. Michael leaned in, his tone softening. Why didn't the hospital help her? Don't they have programs for nurses? Lily shook her head. They said she had to quit because she couldn't do the work anymore. She was too tired, but they didn't help. We lost our insurance. There was no anger in her words, just the quiet resignation of someone who'd learned to expect less. On Madison's screen, a record flashed Olivia Evans, 5 years at Mercy, high praise, voluntary termination, cause personal circumstances. Madison hesitated, then made a call, stepping into the hallway for privacy. The door closed with a hush. Michael stayed, his attention drawn back to Lily, who sat very still, eyes tracing the window, searching for something beyond the skyscrapers. He remembered, with sudden vividness, his own mother, a single parent, always at the edge of exhaustion, yet refusing to let him see her fear. He'd been about Lily's age the first time he realized that even adults could be lost. "Did your mom talk about asking for help?" Michael asked quietly. Lily shook her head. She always tried. She went to meetings. She filled out forms. But the bills kept coming. She told me not to worry, but I heard her crying one night. She blinked hard, not wanting the tears to fall. That's when I decided to come here. Michael sat back, feeling the sharp ache of memory. The room seemed smaller, the city's power and privilege receding until it was just the three of them, each carrying something unspoken. Lily reached into her backpack and pulled out her resume, pushing it toward Michael with both hands. She pointed at the bottom line. "I read about you in the Tribune, about your charity. You helped the Sanchez family, gave them a house when their son was sick. I think you help people when you can." Madison re-entered, closing the door softly behind her. "I spoke to an old contact at Mercy," she said. "Olivia was respected. They were sorry to lose her. But she left quietly, didn't ask for much." Her voice was heavy with implication. No one followed up. Michael turned the resume over in his hands. The blue ink was already smudged in places, the handwriting uneven but determined. He realized, in a way that stung, that Lily had come not for charity, but for trust, for faith that someone would finally see her mother's worth. "I'm not sure what I can do yet," he said, "but I promise I'll try." Lily's face softened, her lips trembling in the smallest of smiles. "Thank you. I knew you'd listen." In that instant, Michael felt the invisible line between authority and empathy blur, the balance shifting quietly in the room. He wondered how many times he'd missed such moments, caught up in the noise of ambition. Outside the boardroom, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm, but inside, something gentle and profound was taking root. Madison watched the exchange, her own doubts dissolving into a sense of purpose she hadn't expected to find that day. But just as the air lightened, a new tension crept in. The phone on the wall rang, sharp and insistent, a reminder that the outside world would not wait forever. Madison answered, listening, her eyes tightening with concern. She covered the receiver and looked at Michael. "Security wants an update. They're asking about Lily, and someone from the press is downstairs asking questions." Michael met her gaze, a flicker of anxiety in his eyes. The world outside was already closing in, and the fragile connection they'd built was about to be tested in ways none of them could have predicted. The quiet in the boardroom hung on, stretching between the three of them. Madison straightened, her professional instincts reasserting themselves as she shifted her weight and met Lily's gaze head-on. She'd seen too many stories at hospital fundraisers, in the long shadows of corporate charities where details didn't line up. There was a necessary skepticism in her line of work, especially now, with the company's reputation in the balance. Madison cleared her throat. "Lily, can I ask you some questions? I want to make sure I understand everything." Her tone was gentle, but the intent behind her words was unmistakable a test, as much for herself as for the child. Lily nodded, gripping the resume again. "Okay. How did you know Michael's name?" Madison's voice was soft, almost maternal, but her eyes flicked to Michael for permission. Lily hesitated, then replied, "I saw his picture in the Tribune, after he helped that boy last year. I remember because my mom cried. She said, 'There are good people out there, even if we don't see them.' I wrote the name down. And you wrote this yourself," Madison continued, flipping through the few handwritten lines, noting the rounded, careful script. "I did," Lily said. "Mom showed me how to spell some words. I practiced at night, when she couldn't sleep." Michael watched the exchange, the careful probing for cracks in Lily's story. He realized, with a pang, that he'd once been the same way, guarded, practical, afraid to let himself care unless every fact was verified. But looking at Lily, he felt something loosen, something almost forgotten. Madison pressed further. How did you get here? Lakeview Tower isn't easy to just walk into. Lily's small hands twisted in her lap. I waited outside. Like I said, I saw a lady with a cart. She works in the cafeteria. I think she let me in because she thought my mom worked here. I followed people into the elevator and watched what floor they pressed. She looked up, nervous for the first time. I didn't mean to break the rules. The words hit Madison harder than she expected. She'd been that girl, once quiet, invisible, working out the angles on her own because she had no other choice. She softened, dropping her official stance for a moment. I believe you, Lily. It just isn't safe for a child to do this alone. Lily's response was a whisper, but it cut through the air. No one helps unless you do something they can't ignore. She held Madison's gaze. I'm not afraid. My mom says sometimes you have to be braver than you feel. Michael's chest tightened. He remembered sitting alone in his own mother's apartment, mapping out plans never just for himself, but to protect the only family he had. The way Lily's face held its composure reminded him of those nights. Madison's resolve wavered. She set the resume on the table and took Lily's hand in her own. Thank you for telling me the truth, she said, voice softer than before. I'm going to help you. Lily, no matter what it means for me, Michael watched this shift, the transfer of loyalty from the company to the person before her. It was a dangerous thing in a world of policies. But he couldn't deny the rightness of it. A knock sounded at the door, breaking the fragile moment. Tom Jennings, head of security, entered, his expression unreadable. He carried a clipboard, the kind reserved for incidents that need official explanations. Mr. Thornton, I need you to explain why there's a miner on the 34th floor without clearance. His tone was measured, but the implication was clear. A line had been crossed. Madison stood, facing Tom with the new certainty she'd found. She's here for her mother. It was my call to keep her here. If you have questions, talk to me. Tom paused, looking between Madison and Michael. There was an edge of respect in his voice when he replied, I'll need a statement from both of you, and this might need to go to HR. Michael nodded, his eyes never leaving Lily. He realized the real risk wasn't about breaking rules, but about deciding which rules were worth following. Madison squeezed Lily's hand, a silent promise passing between them. In that small act, the room felt less like an office and more like a refuge. But outside, the corporate machinery stirred a reminder that every choice had consequences, and sometimes compassion was the most radical act of all. And as Tom closed the door behind him, the uncertain future waited, pressing in from the far side of the glass. A hush fell over the boardroom, the air dense with a tension that seemed to make the windows vibrate. The click of polished shoes echoed in the hallway before the door swung open. In stepped Mr. Wright, the chief of security for Lakeview Tower. He was tall and barrel-chested, hair trimmed close, his badge shining against a dark suit. His presence brought with it the memory of old discipline, the kind forged in years of walking city beats, sorting out trouble before it could take root. His gaze traveled the room, pausing on Lily, who sat small and upright in her chair, and then to Michael, who met him with a steady look. Mr. Thornton, may I have a word? Wright's voice was calm, official, edged with authority that came from knowing all the rules, written and unwritten. Michael glanced at Madison, then back at Lily. He motioned for Wright to speak freely. There are protocols in place, Wright began, his eyes cool but not unkind. You're the CEO, sir, but even you know we can't just let minors into restricted areas, especially not unaccompanied. This is a security breach. I'll need a full account who she is, how she entered, and what your intentions are. Michael rose from his seat, shoulders squaring in a way that didn't invite defiance, but also didn't cower before regulation. He spoke carefully, each word measured. Lily Evans came here for a personal reason. Her mother is ill, she needed help, and she found her way to my office. She's not a threat. She's not here under false pretenses. I accept responsibility. Wright's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in assessment. He looked at Lily, who returned his gaze with a tired bravery, the kind of stubborn hope that doesn't fade, no matter how many times the world says no. Madison stepped forward, her tone respectful but insistent. "Mr. Wright, the child did nothing wrong." She found the only way she could to ask for help. "We're handling the matter with sensitivity and discretion." Wright folded his arms, jaw working. "Ms. Carter, discretion is a luxury in a building like this. We have to be accountable to the board, to the residents, to the press, if it comes to that." He paused, considering, then addressed Michael again. "I served on the force before I came here. I know what it's like to be caught between doing what's right and what's in the rule book. You're asking me to choose. If I look away, that's on me, not just you." Michael's lips tightened, the weight of the moment pressing down. He'd built Thornton Enterprises on discipline and control, but he knew now that sometimes the right thing meant stepping outside the neat boundaries of power. Madison's voice softened. "I take responsibility as well. Mr. Wright, this isn't a matter for HR or press. This is about a child and her mother. I'm asking for your trust. For a moment." Wright studied Lily's resume, turning it over in his hands. The childish loops of blue ink, the innocence of a child who believed the world could change if you just asked. His expression shifted. Something gentle, almost regretful, flickered in his eyes. He knelt to Lily's height, holding her gaze. "You came here alone?" he asked quietly. Lily nodded. "My mom's sick. I had to try." He exhaled, a long, tired sound, and stood. "You've got guts, kid." Then to Michael and Madison, "I'll let this go, for now. But I'll need you to put everything in writing. Full incident report, how she got in, why she stayed, who was involved. The board will have to see it." Michael inclined his head, accepting the compromise, even as he felt the loss of privacy settle on his shoulders. "Understood." Wright tucked the resume into his folder, nodding at Lily. "You remind me of someone I used to know. I hope your mother gets what she needs." He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Just remember, rules keep us safe, but sometimes they can keep us from seeing who needs us most." With that, he exited, closing the door with a finality that left the air trembling in his wake. The boardroom felt suddenly larger and colder. Lily's eyes followed Wright, a quiet storm of worry and hope swirling behind them. For a long moment, no one spoke. Madison knelt by Lily, taking her hand again, offering a squeeze of reassurance. Michael moved to the window, gazing at the city below the endless sprawl of lives and secrets, power and vulnerability. He felt the cost of every choice, the sharp edge of risk, and the ache of possibility. Outside, Wright strode down the hall, report in hand, his own burden heavy and private. Inside, 3 people sat together, bound by a moment of courage that had upended every rule. And as the afternoon light stretched across the floor, Lily let her eyes linger on the closed door, wondering if the world outside would ever feel truly safe again. The air inside the boardroom barely shifted as the latch clicked behind Mr. Wright, leaving Michael, Madison, and Lily alone. Afternoon sunlight streaked across the conference table, casting pale gold lines over the scattered documents and Lily's small, patient hands folded in her lap. Michael stood at the head of the table, his posture tense but softening. He reached for the stack of papers Madison had gathered: medical forms, Lily's resume, an envelope with Olivia's name handwritten in the upper corner. As Michael began sorting through the documents, a faded photograph slipped out and fluttered to the table, landing face up before them. For a moment, none of them spoke. The picture showed a young nurse in crisp white scrubs, arms wrapped around a laughing little girl, Lily, unmistakably younger by several years. The woman's hair was pinned up, her smile wide and kind, eyes shining with the unique exhaustion and pride that only nurses seem to carry. Lily blinked, leaning in. "That's us," she said softly. "I was 3. Mom worked in the ER. She used to bring me to the hospital after her shift if she couldn't get a sitter. She said the nurse's station was the safest place in the city. Michael stared at the image, something long dormant flickering awake in his memory. His mind traveled back to those years when he was just starting out, when his mother fought through chemotherapy at Mercy Hospital. There was a nurse, always gentle, always steady, who sat with them during the worst nights. He remembered the warmth of her hand, the way she spoke to his mother with respect, never pity. He realized with a shock that the woman in the photo, Olivia Evans, was that same nurse. He took the photograph, fingers trembling slightly. He remembered the feeling of helplessness as a son, how Olivia's kindness had offered something close to hope. For a brief second, the gulf between CEO and child shrank to nothing, replaced by a shared history neither of them had known until this moment. Madison watched Michael's face, catching the subtle change, how his features grew uncertain, eyes glimmering with something private and raw. She waited, giving him space to speak, but he said nothing at first. Lily was tracing the lines of her mother's smile with her finger. Mom always said the world is smaller than it feels, that if you're kind to people, it comes back around. I think she's right. Michael swallowed, his voice low when it finally came. Your mother once helped my family. She was there for my mom when nobody else was. He met Lily's gaze, something like awe shining through the confusion. I didn't realize until now. I owe her more than I can say. The words lingered, heavy with meaning. Madison's eyes widened a fraction, sensing a new gravity settle into the room. She saw how Michael's resolve sharpened, not just out of duty or pity, but a genuine connection, a promise awakened by memory. The phone on the table buzzed, shattering the quiet. Madison picked up, her tone brisk but courteous. Madison Carter. Her brow furrowed as she listened. I understand. We'll be up shortly. She set the phone down, glancing at Michael. That was HR. The building's internal communications team picked up the incident. They've already started drafting a response. Word is spreading. Fast. A ripple of anxiety swept through the room. Michael squared his shoulders, already calculating the risks. It was no longer just a question of charity or protocol. The company's reputation, his own career, and Lily's hope were all inextricably linked. He looked at Madison, then at Lily, the photo still trembling between his fingers. We won't let this go, Michael said, more to himself than to the others. Not this time. Lily watched him quietly, her trust given with the frankness only a child can muster. Madison nodded, the line between loyalty to her boss and the cause before her blurring with each passing second. But outside the heavy glass walls, the machinery of the building and of corporate life was already turning. Rumor, suspicion, and the hunger for news would soon batter against the fragile truth they'd found here. Michael set the photo gently beside Lily, his expression caught between gratitude and resolve, and for a moment, the only thing moving in the room was the slow drift of dust in the late afternoon light. The boardroom felt tighter, the afternoon shadows shifting across glass and steel as the hum of Lakeview Tower pressed closer. On the far end of the conference table, Michael stared at his phone, reading the terse email from the internal communications team. The subject line, Urgent Media Inquiry, Child in CEO's office, seemed to vibrate with threat. Madison read over his shoulder, her brow furrowed. There was no hiding now. Word had spread through the building like a crack in the foundation, and the public face of Thornton Enterprises was on the line. Michael turned to Madison. What would you have me say? That a little girl walked in here, and I let her stay because I couldn't bring myself to turn her away, Madison considered, her voice gentle but firm. Tell them the truth. Lily came here because she believes in the good you do. Focus on the company's foundation, the charity. Don't make her into a symbol for some PR campaign. Michael shook his head. The urge to protect Lily at odds with the reality that everything in his world was measured, calculated, documented. I don't want her to be anyone's story but her own. He turned to Lily, who sat quietly, knees tucked up on the edge of the chair. He crouched to her level, lowering his voice. Lily, if you could do anything work anywhere in this building, what would you choose? Lily didn't hesitate. I just want my mom to get better. That's all. Her words were soft, but her resolve was unmistakable. Michael nodded, his chest tightening. Years of boardroom battles, quarterly reports, and cost-benefit analyses couldn't prepare him for the quiet gravity of a child asking only for her mother's life. He glanced at Madison, searching her face for reassurance, for an answer that didn't exist in any spreadsheet. Madison reached out, resting a hand on Michael's forearm. You taught us to look beyond the numbers. Michael, remember why you started the foundation. Not everything that matters can be measured. A quiet beat settled between them. Michael looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawl of Chicago below, the city alive with stories just as hard and improbable as Lily's. His mind raced back through old numbers and names, searching for the thread that would make this moment make sense. Let me see the charity files, he said suddenly. He moved to his desk, unlocked the digital archive, and began scanning through last year's records. There it was, row after row of applications, requests for help, approval stamps, and, more often, denials. He searched for Olivia Evans, fingers flying. Nothing came up for last year. Confused, he dug deeper, into the audit logs. There, a single application, Olivia Evans, Mercy Hospital, request for support marked incomplete documentation. No further action. The error felt like a punch. Her file had slipped through the cracks. A bureaucratic oversight buried by a system that prized efficiency over second chances. Michael sat heavily, the weight of it all pressing into his shoulders. She applied. He murmured, voice thick. She asked for help last year. No one followed up. She was denied for a technicality. The truth of it cut deeper than he expected. Lily, sensing the shift, looked at him with wide, searching eyes. Did I do something wrong? No, sweetheart. Michael shook his head, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. None of this is your fault. The door opened softly as Madison checked her phone, her face drained of color. Security just called. The Tribune's lead reporter is downstairs. She's demanding to see you, asking about a possible misuse of company resources to help a personal connection. The air in the room dropped a degree. Madison's words hung between them. The threat of exposure and misunderstanding as real as the lights of the city blinking on below. Michael glanced at Lily, her fingers tracing the edges of the old photograph, and felt the urge to shield her from the world he'd spent a lifetime learning to navigate. Outside the boardroom, footsteps echoed in the hall. The city's stories kept unfolding, indifferent to hope or heartbreak. The lobby of Lakeview Tower had never seen chaos like this. Floodlights glared against the polished marble floor. Cameramen maneuvered around potted palms, and business people paused, phone cameras already recording, drawn by the pulse of breaking news. Outside, a line of broadcast vans snaked down Michigan Avenue, reporters barking updates over the roar of traffic. It was the kind of frenzy Michael Thornton had always worked to keep far from his company's doors: publicity, noise, vulnerability. But today, the center of the city's attention was a single child with a handwritten resume on the 34th floor. Michael stood at the window with his back to the view, his reflection pale against the city skyline. He watched Madison scroll through her phone, fingers trembling as updates flooded in from every channel. WGN is here, Tribune, even the Sun-Times. Someone from CNN just tweeted about the CEO with the child applicant. Her voice was a low thrum, a mixture of awe and warning. Michael pressed his palm to the glass, grounding himself. What happens if I don't go down? They'll speculate, Madison said quietly. They'll spin their own story. And Lily becomes a headline, not a person. She met his eyes, her conviction clear. You have to go. Tell the truth. Don't let anyone else speak for her or for us. Michael nodded, the fear rising in him surprisingly physical. He was a man used to boardrooms, to strategy and logic. But here, with the fate of a sick woman and her child in his hands, all those rules felt brittle. His chest tightened with an old, familiar panic, the need to fix, to protect, to keep harm out. But there was no keeping the world out now. He knelt by Lily, who was holding her mother's photograph as if it were a lucky charm. Do you want to come down with me, or would you rather stay here? Lily shook her head. I want to see Mom, but I'm not scared. She said it with the innocence only a child could still carry after so many disappointments. Michael squeezed her hand. You're braver than I am. They stepped out into the corridor. Madison, ever the shield, flanked Lily, speaking into her headset, orchestrating the ride down. In the elevator, the silence grew heavy. Michael's reflection met his gaze in the mirrored doors lines deeper than last year, a look he didn't quite recognize. As the doors parted, the noise from the lobby crashed over them. Security guards tried in vain to control the crowd. Microphones jostled forward, voices calling, Mr. Thornton, is it true, and what about the little girl? Flashes popped, catching every flinch, every moment of hesitation. Michael raised a hand, steady but not commanding. Please, give us room. Madison spoke first, clearing a path to the reception desk. He'll make a statement, but no pictures of the child. That's the agreement. The crowd didn't care for boundaries. They surged anyway, and Michael felt the old urge to run replaced by something stronger, the need to stand firm. He started, his words careful. This is Lily Evans. She came here to ask for help for her mother, Olivia, who is ill. She is not a case study. She is a person. We are doing everything we can, but the sound of a wheelchair's wheels cut through the noise. An orderly from Mercy Hospital navigated the crush, and in the chair sat a woman whose frailty was almost shocking. Olivia Evans, cheeks pale, hair pulled back, eyes fever-bright and afraid. She looked smaller than Michael remembered all those years ago, but in her posture was the quiet strength he'd always associated with her a nurse's grace, still upright against the odds. Lily's cry, Mom pierced the din, and she raced forward, flinging her arms around Olivia. Olivia held her close, whispering something no microphone could catch. The reporters, caught between curiosity and discomfort, fell into silence. Olivia looked up, finding Michael in the crowd. Her gaze was unwavering hope, fighting with humiliation. Gratitude mingled with dread. She nodded to him, then turned to the cameras. If you want to know the truth, Olivia said, her voice clear and unshaken, ask me. I have nothing to hide. But please, don't use my daughter for your stories. She's just a little girl who loves her mother. The room hung suspended for a heartbeat, the story shifting. Michael stepped closer, ready to take the questions, but knowing in that moment there were things even he could not control. Behind him, Madison reached for her phone again, eyes on the stream of headlines that would shape tomorrow. The lobby of Lakeview Tower, usually a world of polished calm and muted business talk, now throbbed with the sharp pulse of scandal. Camera lenses glinted like eyes in the crowd. Microphones crowded forward, and the hush that fell as Olivia Evans was wheeled into the open center felt almost sacred, a clearing in a storm. Security held the line, but people pressed close, eager for the next twist in the story that had leapt from rumor to citywide obsession. Michael moved through the chaos with deliberate steps. He looked less like the untouchable CEO of Thornton Enterprises and more like a man called to account. He made way for Olivia and Lily, ensuring they could sit directly across from the hungry circle of journalists, their faces shadowed by doubt and curiosity. Lily settled beside her mother, hands folded in her lap, her little red sweater a bright spot in the swirl of suits and dark coats. The first question landed with the sharpness of accusation. Mr. Thornton, can you explain why this child is here in your office, seeking employment? Is this a publicity stunt for your charity? Another chimed in, voice thin with skepticism. Some believe you're using this story for PR. Others say you've abused your authority, prioritizing this family over others in need. What do you say to those critics? Michael started to reply, but Olivia's hand came to rest on his, a gentle stop. She drew in a careful breath, looked directly into the cameras, and spoke with a dignity that silenced the chatter. My name is Olivia Evans. For 10 years, I was a nurse at Mercy Hospital. I cared for dozens of families, sometimes sitting up all night with children no one else could comfort. But when I got sick, My insurance didn't cover the treatment I needed. I lost my job because I was too weak to keep working. My daughter and I lost our home, and every day since then, we've fought just to survive. I did not ask to be here today, but my little girl would not let go of hope. She brought us here because she still believes in kindness, even when the world tells her she shouldn't. Lily squeezed her mother's hand, eyes huge and clear. The room leaned in for a moment, the thirst for spectacle replaced by something more human compassion, or maybe the memory of it. Michael felt the pressure of their stares, the weight of all the things he could not fix with money or position. The walls of power and protection seemed paper thin as the next reporter asked, "Is it true Thornton Enterprises denied Olivia's request for aid last year?" A new face pushed through the circle, a reporter from the Tribune. "We have documentation that shows her application was rejected not for lack of need, but due to a clerical error. Mr. Thornton, how do you respond to your own system failing someone like her?" The crowd murmured, some with sympathy, many with suspicion. Michael's hands curled, the familiar control slipping away. He glanced at Madison, who nodded, silently urging him to speak plainly. He faced the cameras, voice steady but tight. "I cannot undo the mistake that was made. I did not know until today how our process failed. Mrs. Evans and her daughter, but I am responsible. I will make it right, not because of headlines or pressure, but because it's the right thing to do." The words hung between them, fragile and raw. In the brief pause, a ripple of doubt moved through the room. Had he really not known? Or was this just a performance? Then, from the back of the crowd, a member of the building's board of directors appeared, gray-suited and unsmiling, clipboard in hand. He spoke with the authority that could shut down an empire. "Mr. Thornton, you are requested immediately in the boardroom upstairs. This incident has become more than a personal matter. It's about the company, its policies, and its leadership. The board expects a full explanation and a decision now." Madison gently helped Olivia and Lily aside as Michael straightened. The elevator doors opened, swallowing him and the board member into their mirrored silence. He didn't look back, but everyone in the lobby could feel the air had changed. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, but to Michael, it felt more like a bell marking the start of something inevitable. He stepped into the glass-walled boardroom, high above the restless city, the quiet in here a stark contrast to the storm downstairs. The board of directors waited, their faces lined with both age and calculation. The conference table crowded with folders, water glasses, and the hum of suppressed anxiety. The chairman, Mr. Cartwright, regarded Michael with a measured calm that could freeze a river. His voice was even, but each word held weight. "We need to be clear. Michael, the company's reputation, the trust of shareholders. These are not things to gamble on sentiment. We expect transparency, not theatrics." Around the table, other faces flickered, some wary, some impatient, a few simply tired of the mess. Madison sat at the edge, hands folded tight in her lap, her gaze flickering between Michael and the row of silent executives. The clock on the wall ticked a bit too loudly. Michael knew this dance the polite way powerful people threatened each other, cloaked in rules and risk assessments. But never before had the stakes felt so personal, so tangled with shame and hope. A director with silver hair, Miss Atwell, cleared her throat. "We've seen the media. Michael, your actions, while perhaps well-intended, have put us all in a very precarious position. The Foundation's guidelines exist for a reason. Why this case? Why now?" Michael met her eyes. "Because this child had the courage to walk in here and ask for help. Because her mother was failed by our system. If we turn our backs on them, how can we stand behind the words printed in every annual report? What do those words mean if not this?" A pause hung heavy. Some board members shifted, uncomfortable. Others pursed their lips, avoiding his gaze. But in the back, Mr. Silverman, the oldest on the board, sat a little straighter. He'd grown up in the rough parts of Detroit. Michael remembered his stories about sleeping in church basements when his father was out of work, about the women who handed out bread with no questions asked. Now, For the first time. Silverman nodded. Just once. Mr. Cartwright steepled his fingers. Intentions aside, you've opened the company up to significant liability. There will be an internal review, and likely an external audit of our charity program. Every dollar, every exception. Are you prepared for what this means? Michael, I am. Michael replied, the words coming easier now. I'd rather answer for choosing compassion than defend a policy that leaves a sick mother and her child with nowhere to turn. If we cannot be flexible for real people, why do we exist at all? The room quieted, the balance of power shifting not with shouts or applause, but with a hush that meant the argument was landing somewhere deeper. Some directors looked away, the old calculations slipping into something closer to self-reflection. Madison glanced up, her eyes shining with worry and something like pride. For a heartbeat. Michael caught her gaze a silent thanks, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this room, or in the choice he'd just made. Just then, the door opened and the company's general counsel, Ms. Patel, entered. She placed a stack of files on the polished wood with a subtle finality. These are the cases Olivia Evans and others like her who were denied support. The board will need to review all of them. There will be questions, not just from the media, but from the SEC, maybe even the Attorney General's office. If this becomes a pattern, the fallout could be enormous. Michael nodded, understanding the storm he'd called down. But something in the room had already changed, a glimmer of old pain, flickering in the eyes of people who had spent their lives pretending such stories were not their concern. He did not reply with defiance or apology, just a steady look at the stack of files, as if weighing them against the values printed on every office wall and waiting for the board to see which side of the scale would tip first. The boardroom lights felt brighter as the meeting dragged on, casting sharp shadows across tired faces. Michael sat at the far end of the table, papers spread out before him, every detail of Olivia's case illuminated by the fluorescent glare. The board's questions, once impersonal, had taken a sharper edge. Why this child? Why now? Did you think you could bypass policy? Each inquiry pressed at his composure, but he met them with a calm that came less from certainty and more from exhaustion. Madison sat a few seats away, her back straight, hands clasped tightly in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was steady, her words clear. It isn't about breaking rules for one family, she said. It's about recognizing that our process leaves people behind. When a woman who spent her life caring for others slips through the cracks because a form is missing or someone's saving money, that's not oversight, that's neglect. The room fell quiet, the usual confidence of the board replaced by something more uncertain. Michael watched the faces around him. Some were defensive, others doubtful. Yet a few older members who'd once felt the sting of need looked away in shame. The story was no longer just about Lily and Olivia. It was about every line on every page, every voice that went unheard. A shift in the air came when Madison, fingers trembling only slightly, produced a document from her folder. This isn't just Olivia's case. She continued, I found records of at least 12 similar applications, all denied in the same week last year. The rejection reasons are vague or missing. And this, she held up a printed email, was a directive from Mr. Ray Mitchell, our head of HR, instructing his team to limit approvals to keep our charity reserve above target for the end-of-year financial report. The accusation landed hard. Ray Mitchell, who had kept to the back of the room, stiffened. His reputation for keeping the company's finances lean was well known. Until now, that had made him valuable. Now, it made him vulnerable. His eyes darted to Michael, searching for an ally and finding none. Mr. Cartwright leaned forward, his expression stony. Ray, is this accurate? The room stilled. Ray, voice tight, defended himself. We had to show strength to investors. You all know the pressure. Exceptions turn into precedents. If we opened the floodgates, his words faltered. The logic of policy sounded hollow in the face of real people suffering. Madison pressed on. So, we punished those who had no voice, just to make the balance sheet look better. Her tone was neither angry nor pleading, but steady, as if naming the problem was the only way to pull the poison out. Michael felt something settle in him, a kind of resolve he hadn't felt in years. He looked across the table, not at Ray, but at every director present. We failed them. That's the truth. I propose we review every denied case, starting with Olivia's, and make the process transparent. I accept whatever comes of that, but I won't allow our name to stand for silence and excuses. His words sent a ripple through the room. For the first time, the board wasn't thinking about risk or profit. They were thinking about their legacy. Ray Mitchell's composure broke for just a second. Fear flickered in his eyes, a silent plea that no one answered. He looked smaller now, the armor of authority gone. The board would have to decide if it was loyalty to him or to the truth that mattered. Michael glanced at Madison, and she gave a single, quiet nod. In that moment, it was clear the masks everyone wore for so long could no longer hide what was right in front of them. The silence that followed felt less like the end of a fight and more like the first breath before a storm, waiting for someone to claim what was broken or walk away from it for good. The morning sun over Chicago did little to warm the nerves of those gathering at Lakeview Tower's vast lobby. Reporters clustered near the revolving doors, microphones poised and cameras ready, their faces a blend of skepticism and anticipation. Employees shuffled in quietly, uncertain whether to be proud or anxious. Word had spread overnight. Every major news outlet in the city was covering the charity scandal at Thornton Enterprises, and the public was hungry for a reckoning. Michael arrived early, moving with deliberate calm, his suit perfectly pressed, yet shoulders heavy. The weight of what was about to unfold pressed into every step. Madison was already there, briefing the company's legal team, her voice low but firm, near the stage. Olivia sat in a wheelchair, Lily by her side, both dressed simply but neat. For the first time in months, Olivia's hair was brushed and her eyes, though tired, met the world with a kind of quiet resolve. Lily clung to her mother's hand, her small body tense, gaze flickering across the crowd. At exactly 10 o'clock, Michael stepped up to the podium. The chatter died away. He began without preamble, his tone rawer than anyone had ever heard from the city's most polished CEO. I stand here today not as a leader with answers, but as a man who must admit his own failings, he said. He spoke of Olivia, of all the forgotten names in dusty folders, of a system that prized efficiency over empathy. He named the mistakes and did not soften the truth. For a moment, it seemed the entire lobby held its breath. Behind him, Madison watched the faces in the crowd: employees, hospital workers, charity volunteers, and ordinary citizens who'd come hoping for more than another empty promise. She saw something shift in their eyes as Michael spoke, a blend of anger, hurt, and maybe relief that someone finally acknowledged what had been swept aside. Michael made his commitment clear. Starting today, Thornton Enterprises will cover all medical expenses for Olivia Evans, and we will immediately reopen every rejected application from the last 5 years, no matter the reason. We owe it to every family who reached out for help and never heard back. From now on, this company will answer to compassion before profit. The words seemed to echo, not just through the lobby, but out into the city. Reporters scribbled. Phones captured the moment, and for the first time, the story belonged not to lawyers or PR teams, but to everyone watching. Olivia's eyes filled with tears. Lily squeezed her mother's hand, her own fear melting into a quiet, trembling smile. And then Michael did something no one expected. He stepped down from the podium, crossed to where Lily sat, and knelt before her. There, on the marble floor, the CEO of one of Chicago's largest companies looked up at a 6-year-old girl and said, "You reminded us what matters." His voice was thick with emotion, the kind that can't be rehearsed. "Today, you taught me more than I've learned in all my years here." For a long second, the room was silent. Some cried quietly, others simply watched, letting the weight of the gesture sink in. Lily reached out, her small hand finding Michael's. The world, for a breath, felt new. As the applause swelled, Madison glanced to the side and caught Ray Mitchell slipping out of the crowd, his face pale and set. He knew what was coming: the investigation, the loss of his title, the public fallout. Yet for the first time, he offered no excuses, only a silent exit, as if he understood he could no longer hide behind numbers and rules. And as the cameras flashed and voices buzzed with a different kind of energy, Michael stood, feeling the tide turn, not toward comfort, but toward something more honest. And maybe, just maybe, something that might last. The echoes of the morning's press conference lingered long after the crowd had dispersed. Michael sat alone in his corner office, shoulders sagging, staring at the skyline. It was the first time in years he felt both the relief of honesty and the exhaustion that comes from finally dropping one's guard. He could see the city stretching out below, busy as ever, unaware that somewhere up here, a battle for dignity and purpose was playing out in quiet rooms. News outlets wasted no time. Some ran headlines calling Michael Thornton a symbol of corporate conscience, while others questioned whether this show of remorse was just strategic damage control. He scrolled through messages and watched his public image swing between hero and manipulator. Each opinion cut a little deeper, especially knowing the story was bigger than just him. In a quiet waiting room down the hall, Madison tried to soothe Olivia and Lily. She watched Michael through the glass, her own face tense but supportive, trying to hold the pieces together. Meanwhile, the real storm had just begun. The board of directors moved swiftly, launching a formal investigation into the charity fund's failures. Independent auditors were called in, and every employee, from entry-level staff to executives, braced for scrutiny. Ray Mitchell, though suspended, was not out of moves. Years of carefully cultivated alliances meant whispers, rumors, and backroom conversations carried his influence even in absence. Some department heads openly resisted Michael's reforms, questioning every decision, hoping to stall or overturn the new path. Late that afternoon, everything changed again. An anonymous email surfaced on social media and quickly went viral among company channels. The email detailed a string of similar cases applications from desperate families, all rejected without fair review. One case jumped out at everyone. It involved the sibling of a current board member, denied assistance during a medical crisis. Suddenly, the narrative was no longer about one mistake, but a pattern woven through the very fabric of Thornton Enterprises. The building felt charged, the air electric with uncertainty and suspicion. In his office, Michael read through the leaked messages. He felt the ground shifting under him, but there was no turning back now. He picked up his phone, ready to call an emergency board meeting, determined to face the next wave head-on. Meanwhile, Ray Mitchell was not finished. From a conference room tucked away from the main hall, he spoke in hushed tones to a senior shareholder, one who had much to lose if the investigation went too far. Their voices, strained and low, carried just enough for someone to overhear outside. Lily, small and unnoticed, had wandered the hallway searching for Madison. She paused outside the door, drawn by the urgency in their voices. Words like discredit, take him down, and protect our interests hit her ears, making her pulse race with confusion and fear. She slipped away, her mind spinning, her feet moving fast toward Madison, desperate to share what she'd heard. As dusk fell over the city, the line between old power and new promise had never felt thinner. And somewhere in that hush before the next reckoning, Lily's voice trembled at the edge of a truth no one else wanted to see. The tension inside Lakeview Tower pressed in from every side, each hallway carrying the quiet thrum of anxiety. Conversations dropped to whispers as word spread about a closed-door meeting of the largest shareholders. The air held the scent of panic and calculation. Rumors traveled faster than the elevator, picking up urgency with each telling. Michael was summoned to the 34th floor, his name spoken in clipped, formal tones by the executive assistant. Downstairs. Madison paced restlessly. She'd looked for Lily in every office, every lounge, the lobby, even the janitor's closet, her heart thudding louder with each empty room. The girl was nowhere, and with Olivia resting quietly in a guest room under the care of a nurse, Madison's fear sharpened into something desperate. Upstairs, The mood was cold, hostile. Michael entered the glass-walled conference room to find the board gathered, eyes trained on him with that old, familiar calculation: can he protect our money, or has he become a liability? The chairman's voice was clipped. We are here to discuss the fallout of your actions. Michael, the company's stock has dropped 5% in 2 days. Investors are restless. There are concerns about your judgment and about the future of this firm under your leadership. Each accusation hung in the air, not just a challenge to his authority, but to his character. Michael stood at the end of the table, searching the faces of people he'd worked beside for decades. He saw ambition, fear, regret, and in a few, the stubborn hint of hope. Meanwhile, Madison darted from floor to floor, past receptionists and security guards, her voice trembling as she asked for Lily. In a sudden moment of panic, she remembered the hidden garden on the 12th floor terrace. She found Lily there, knees pulled tight to her chest, tears tracing silent tracks down her face. Madison knelt beside her, softening her voice. You okay? Honey, I need your help. The grown-ups upstairs are forgetting what matters. She brushed the hair from Lily's eyes, took her hand, and together they walked to the elevator, silent except for the sound of their joined footsteps. As Michael tried to defend his actions, the doors slid open. Heads turned as Madison entered, Lily at her side. The hush was immediate, thick. Lily's small voice carried through the room, breaking the tension. I don't understand all this grown-up stuff, but I know who's been kind to me and my mom. Sometimes being good isn't about rules. It's about helping. The room stilled, the words settling in places that accusations could not reach. Even the most hardened among them looked away, uncertain, reminded of truths they'd once known. Madison stepped forward, her expression resolute. She reached into her pocket and played an audio recording for the room. Ray Mitchell's voice echoed out, clipped and unmistakable. The plot to undermine Michael, the plans to manipulate votes and hide past mistakes, it was all there, laid bare. Ray's face blanched, sweat beating at his temple as his gaze darted around, searching for support. One by one, people pulled away. The center of power shifted in a heartbeat. The chairman collected himself, jaw tight. Given these developments, there will be a vote of confidence regarding Michael's leadership. Simultaneously, an independent investigation will audit all charity files from the last decade. Anyone involved in cover-ups will answer for it. The gavel of corporate justice came down not with a bang, but with a quiet, shared realization that the old ways had reached their limit. Madison squeezed Lily's shoulder, and the room lingered in a heavy pause, every eye waiting for the next move to be made by someone brave enough to remember what decency looks like. The morning light over Lakeview Tower barely softened the tension that ran through every corridor and office. On this day, nobody talked about sales or projections. The only question that mattered was who would lead and what kind of company Thornton Enterprises would become. The main hall had been transformed into a stage for reckoning. Rows of chairs filled with staff, board members, and guests formed silent walls. Every eye fixed on the empty podium, on the front row. Olivia and Lily sat together, hands clasped, their presence quiet but deeply felt. Michael waited behind the velvet curtain, breathing slow and deep, the weight of all these months pressing down on his shoulders. He looked in the mirror, searching his own eyes for the resolve to walk through this storm. He was not the man who had once seen only numbers and bottom lines. Every face he'd passed on his way in this morning, every hesitant nod, every hopeful glance had changed him in ways that went deeper than policy or public image. When the clock struck 9, Michael walked to the center of the hall, a sea of quiet anticipation rippling around him. The chairman began, his voice steady, reading the formal motion for the vote of confidence and the restructuring of the foundation's oversight. Before the ballot could be handed out, Ray Mitchell was asked to address the room. Ray, suit crisp and expression fixed, did not offer an apology. He looked straight into the cameras, launching into a sharp attack on Michael, accusing him of turning personal charity into a spectacle for the media, of using Olivia and Lily's hardship to rehabilitate his own image. A few heads nodded in agreement, but most faces remained impassive, watching, waiting for something real. Michael stood his ground. His response was quiet, each word chosen with care. I spent years believing that leadership meant keeping order, controlling the outcome, protecting the company from risk at all costs. I see now I was wrong. True power isn't about control. It's about taking responsibility, especially for what you once overlooked, and standing with those you failed, even if it costs you everything. He let his words linger, eyes meeting those of the people who had trusted him and those who had not. The silence that followed was thick. Then, unexpectedly, an older member of the board, Mrs. Edith Barnes, whose own nephew's aid application had once vanished in the shuffle, rose to her feet. Her voice was unshakable as she told the room, "This is not only Michael's burden. Many of us let these failures happen for too long, afraid of the cost. Today, I support the man who had the courage to stop pretending we were always right, and I will not let this company go back to hiding from its own conscience." With that, she called for a direct vote, not just on Michael's future, but on an overhaul of the entire foundation process. The moment fractured the tension. More voices joined, the atmosphere turning as old wounds and buried truths surfaced, raw but ready to heal. Ballots were cast, hands raised. In minutes, Ray Mitchell was officially removed, his supporters scattering, the weight of his legacy clear for all to see. The board announced a new leadership structure, one that required outside oversight for all charitable work, annual reviews with public reporting, and direct lines for applicants to challenge unfair decisions. But the loudest moment came after the votes were counted. For the first time in months, applause broke out, not the polite, performative kind, but something real, growing, unstoppable. Michael did not smile. He looked for Olivia and Lily, his eyes catching theirs. They did not rush to embrace him. Instead, Olivia simply nodded, tears shining in her eyes. Lily gave a small, hopeful wave. That was enough. In that silent understanding, Michael knew the victory he wanted most was not the title or the seat at the table, but the quiet, unbreakable trust that had begun to return one choice, one child, one promise at a time. He paused in the entryway, the echo of applause still in the air, watching the crowd begin to disperse as the rain started to fall against the wide glass windows. Autumn in Chicago crept in quietly that year, golden leaves skittering across the sidewalks, softening the hard edges left behind by all the battles of spring and summer. The city seemed gentler, the pace inside Lakeview Tower less frantic. No more crowds of reporters waiting by the glass doors. No angry whispers about the board's next move. No nervous glances at the elevators. The drama that had once seized every floor felt like a distant echo, replaced now by something simpler, ordinary life, returned at last. On a late afternoon, Michael made his way to Lincoln Park, carrying a stack of storybooks under one arm. Thornton Enterprises, under the new leadership, had set Olivia and Lily up in a small apartment just off the park. It wasn't grand, but it was bright and clean, with wide windows that let in the gentle light and a clear view of the trees, beginning to turn gold. For Olivia, the change in scenery meant more than just comfort. She'd started a new treatment regimen, and while her steps were still slow, her color had returned. Her voice, once thin with worry, now carried warmth when she greeted Michael at the door. Lily, bouncing out of her room in a faded sweatshirt, was already eager to show him her latest school assignment. Her laughter filled the space, mingling with the smell of soup from the kitchen. She looked healthier, her eyes no longer shadowed by fear of hospital bills or looming uncertainty. Every week, Michael came by sometimes with groceries, sometimes with news from the outside world, but mostly just to listen. He never arrived as a CEO, never brought the weight of the company with him. It was just Michael, the friend who'd learned to see beyond numbers, who now valued quiet moments and the soft resilience in Lily's stories about her classmates. Madison, steadfast as ever, had stepped into a new role too. She was now the director of the renewed Thornton Charitable Fund, its process rebuilt from the ground up to be transparent and open. Its priorities set by panels that included real people recipients, social workers, and even school teachers from neighborhoods like Lily's. She often stopped by after meetings, sharing coffee with Olivia, chatting with Lily, keeping the promise that this time No one would be left behind by paperwork or the indifference of distant authority. As the sun dipped behind the city's skyline, Michael found himself sitting by the living room window, gazing out at the park, where children were playing in a swirl of leaves. Olivia sat nearby, working on a crossword, her face calm, almost content. Lily shuffled through her backpack and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, her latest art project from school. She handed it to Michael with a proud smile. On the page, a tree stood in the center, its leaves a riot of yellow and red. Beneath the branches, 3 figures stood together: a small girl, her mother in a bright scarf, and a tall man in a suit with his tie loosened, all drawn with the awkward charm of a child's hand. Across the bottom, Lily had written in big, careful letters, "Thank you for giving us hope." Michael looked at the drawing for a long moment, feeling something inside loosen that had been wound tight for years. He didn't try to say anything wise or grand. He only smiled, his hand trembling slightly as he set the picture on the coffee table. Evening settled softly over the apartment. In that room, there was no talk of corporate titles, no replay of the old storms, only the quiet certainty that, after all that had happened, a little faith had survived and grown enough to bring 3 people together in a city that had once seemed so wide and cold. He listened to Lily's gentle chatter, Olivia's quiet laughter, and knew that sometimes the best victories left no headlines. Sometimes all that mattered was that someone believed again, and the world, for once, felt small enough to hold in your hands. Light filtered through the city trees, catching on the edge of a worn sketchbook by the window. Somewhere, a child's laughter echoed in an empty hallway, a small reminder that even in uncertain spaces, hope has its own quiet way of returning. No one holds all the answers, but sometimes a single act of kindness tips the balance, quietly shifting what seems possible. Perhaps trust isn't won by grand gestures, but in the gentle, everyday courage to begin again. Out beyond the busy streets, autumn leaves drift down and settle, reminding us that change comes softly, rarely on schedule, always in its own time. And if you listen closely, there's still a story unfolding, just past the edge of what you can see.